Yeah, West Point graduate, U.S. Army major, Iraq and Afghanistan veteran, and contributed editor. We have someone here, of course, who is also a Iraq veteran, one of our uh, folks here. And the discussion is 500,000 veterans are kept from health care and benefits due to unfair charges.
Discharges, yes.
Yeah, unfair discharges. Yeah,
Charges and discharges.
yeah, charges and discharges. That's a terrible, terrible thing.
Okay.
Who wants to?
Okay,
Yeah.
Suzanne, we're going to talk to Danny now. So maybe you can lead us on the discussion. Explain to us what this whole issue is about. Unfair discharges and why this is occurring.
So do you want me to begin or Danny?
Probably best for Suzanne. Yeah.
Yes.
So Danny and Danny can really give a view from the inside. So basically, right now there's 750 or 600,000 people since 1980 who've received what are called other than honorable discharges. So the folks in the military are familiar with the discharge process, but there's I think 6 different discharge categories. Administrative discharges, which include honorable, general under honorable conditions, uncharacterized, and other than honorable. And then there's 2 punitive categories, bad conduct and dishonorable, and that you have to have a court-martial to get those. And essentially, increasingly, the military, the different branches of the service are using these other than honorable and general discharges in an unfair way, and they penalize veterans because other than honorable discharges deprive the veteran of the status in the VA of veteran, and they can't get any benefits whatsoever, including the GI Bill or access to health care. And this is a particular tragedy since, as Danny will explain, a lot of these other than honorable discharges are given to service members who have a couple minor disciplinary infractions, which can include anything from being late to formation a couple times to so-called insubordination to getting drunk to being to a DUI to getting into a fight, and often this has been well documented. The service member who gets one of these discharges might have a traumatic brain injury or some kind of emotional problem, PTSD, and they're just acting out or self-medicating. And these are people who really, really need help from the VA, and they can't get it. The people with general under honorable conditions discharges, and there's 600,000 of them, they can get access to VA health care. That's the good news. The bad news is if the VA helps put them back together again and they're sort of ready to roll and they could go to college or community college or whatever, they can't get access to the GI Bill. And so we have sort of close to 1.2 million folks out there who have these bad paper discharges, which we feel at Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute are often retaliatory. By the way, many people who get other than honorable discharges are women who report sexual harassment.
Mm-hmm. Wow. It sounds like this is very, very subjective, and many of the issues that they're talking about really are minor infractions that you would consider. You could imagine in a regular workplace if someone tried to do that to an employee, it would be really just, people would look at them like they're, sort of crazy, trying to say that an employee, was late for work 3 times, so they finally discharged and, dishonorably from work.
Correct.
And
well, the thing, I'm so glad you raised that issue because in the workman's comp, and essentially the VA, the Veterans Health Administration, is kind of a workman's comp system. If an employee gets their arm cut off because of an unsafe machine or gets black lung disease because of an unsafe mine, they don't get denied access to workman's comp because they got into a fight with a foreman or got drunk on the weekend.
Right.
And, that's exactly what's happening. I mean, not only are they discharged, kicked out of the service, but they're kept from getting help from the problems that the service created. And I think Danny really, Danny was there. I mean, Danny was a company commander, and he can tell us, just why so many of these discharges are given.
Okay.
Yeah, go right ahead. Well, I was just going to say, we have right here with us, my co-host was also in Afghanistan. Yeah.
Iraq. Yeah, I did 2 tours in Iraq.
Iraq, yeah.
Yeah, but I was running the medical unit because I was a state, I was a surgeon general here in Illinois, but I was actually a commander in Mosul, Iraq, and
Iraq,
and served in a few different places over there. But I really am really interested in hearing what Danny's view of that is, because there's so many of us have come back with different experiences over there, looking at different angles of how things were carried out and how people were treated as veterans. So maybe you can tell us more, Danny, and what does this mean for our veterans who are out there?
No, really, I'm glad to. This is such an important issue.
Yeah.
If we started by assuming that every soldier who had one of these bad paper discharges deserved it, right? If we assume that every one of them had done something terrible, the system in a way would still make no sense. And what Suzanne's been getting at is it leaves these folks with no education, employment, or healthcare opportunities.
Yes.
It's kind of like a moralizing rather than a utilitarian approach. So it creates the cyclical failure and the spiral. But what I'm here to say is that, from the commander's hat, so to speak, and it sounds like you have some of the same experience, and this is at the height of the Afghan and Iraq wars that I'm speaking of. So really especially that 2006 to 2013 era, we had tons of soldiers deployed and getting ready to deploy. I can kind of provide a little bit of like an under the hood look.
Yes.
And the reality is that what we had was this frazzled, overwrought system, kind of by dint of our endless wars cycle, taxing soldiers through these deployments. And what it did to commanders, in my experience at least, was it incentivized sort of an empathy-absent urgency to get rid of what we used to call our problem children soldiers. And as Suzanne mentioned, that could run the gamut from minor discipline to, mid-range to high-level stuff. But the reason for that is because we wanted to accelerate the discharges, because every 2 weeks usually, especially in the run-up to deployments, we had to provide a percentage status report of how many of our soldiers were deployable. And if you had pending discipline or drug positive or any number of things, health issues that were often emotional health that were tied to disciplinary issues, then your numbers were low, and that meant you couldn't take those soldiers to combat. Well, of course, from a strategic point of view or a tactical one, you couldn't get replacement troops while you had those kind of non-deployables on the books. And so as a commander who was judged by those numbers, and your unit was good or bad, and you were a positive or a negative commander based on your percentages, which was sort of a ludicrous bureaucratic mechanism. But also you needed to get those soldiers into your unit, those new replacements, in order to train them. So it really did incentivize getting rid of these, problem children. And a lot of commanders would say how much they hated babysitting was the phrase. But of course that takes the sort of agency and empathy out of it. But overall, the system, especially at the height of our deployment wars, was built to create a situation where we were pushing these people out without the care they needed, often without looking at the individual cases, but the care and time that it deserved. And that's sort of a tragedy in its outcomes.
Let me just ask you this, Danny. We appreciate the fact, and of course, my co-host, as you well know already, where he was. But you are a West Point graduate. That's a little different than just being out there.
Right.
I'm just surprised that sort of thing can happen in that kind of circumstance.
Yes.
Well, certainly there aren't a ton of sort of professional officers. A West Point officer comes in like a second lieutenant, just like everybody else, but there is still a bit of a statistical disproportionality at the general officer ranks and stuff. And it is a little rarer that the career officer, particularly of the West Point variety, decides to dissent or critique the system. But I think that it's just my personal sort of intellectual and experiential kind of journey was such that it felt that it would be obscene and not a service to the soldiers that I was trained and taught to prioritize, right? Your soldiers, taking care of soldiers. If I didn't speak out now with those 600, 500,000 soldiers suffering, then what kind of commander would I be? Regardless of where I went to school, you know.
Let's take a caller for our guest. Jay, hi, you're on WVON.
Hello,
America's
thanks,
Heroes Group. Fine. How you doing, sir? Good.
Yes, I would like to submit to Congressman Davis, and we want to work with Senator Tammy Duckworth on this, is that one of the major reasons why you have so many problems with Vietnam so-called vets having problems getting medical benefits is because Congress has not done its constitutional duty to actually have on a bill where a Vietnam conflict is declared as a war, for example, with a specific beginning and an end, not a police action and not a 60-day presidential continuation. I would like the congressman to submit a bill in conjunction with the Senator Tammy Duckworth, who particularly should be understanding this, where from now on that Congress shall officially declare them as wars. Vietnam as an example, Iraqi conflicts. As long as they keep doing that, you're going to have these radio programs. From now on, get a bill passed where there's an official beginning, at least the Vietnam War, at least conflict, at least do that one. An official beginning, an official end where veterans have all the rights under that. One of the good examples, I talked to a gentleman who was in the Iraqi conflict, and he claims that because he was on the second tour, funny name for it, and didn't finish, and got IUD'd and lost both of his legs, he only gets like 25%. Maybe he has to know somebody, but that's only because we have not had an official declaration of what is considered a war and not. So, Congressman Davis, you got to get on the stick on that. From now on, get that bill passed, because that's your constitutional duty.
Yeah. Good point. All right, Jay, thank you so much for your call. It was certainly appreciated. And I think there are many, many people who certainly feel as our caller does.
Yeah. Yes. And that's the point that he was making, and it gets back to this, Danny. One of the things that you were mentioning, and it sounds like there's almost a failure of leadership in those situations. And it sounds like there are things, and Suzanne as well, that there sounds like there are things where decisions are being made where people are not managing their subordinates the way they should be, or recognizing things like rape, or looking at this as being a minor infraction. And under the stress of war, people do have those reactions, like you were mentioning, PTSD. They may have anger and other things, that are there. So this speaks to maybe a need for leadership to be better trained in recognizing these things and dealing with them, right?
Well, I think Danny can probably speak to that, but I think the reality is that we need to separate the process of medically discharging people, having people who are deployable. If you want to have people who are deployable and you're judged by how many people are deployable, and you need to get rid of people quickly because the medical discharge process is too lengthy and cumbersome, then that's fine. But separate the process of separation from the military with the benefits. And I think, your caller just talked about failure of leadership. We have a failure of congressional leadership, because the Congress needs to update the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944 and essentially allow all service members. Okay, maybe you can debate whether dishonorably discharged people should be allowed, but that's a trifling amount. It's like 130 to 150 a year. But all these other service members who've served, their country and volunteered, they should be allowed access to the VA and to the GI Bill and to other benefits. And the way you deal with that is you allow, you pass a bill in Congress which changes how the VA defines a veteran and really clarifies the lack of clarity in the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, and there's also, people should know, a number of groups, including the Harvard Veterans Legal Clinic and Swords to Plowshare, have put in front of the VA a petition to change the rules of how the VA deals with these veterans with these bad papers, and sadly, but not surprisingly, the Trump administration has really not acted on that petition and has essentially rejected it. And if people are going to call Congress, Duckworth and Davis and whoever, they should be calling them about that. But we really need a change in decoupling the discharge process from the punitive or retaliatory or harsh denial of services.
Suzanne.
And I think Danny could probably comment more
Suzanne
on that.
Suzanne and Danny, we wish we had more time, but we don't on this. You've given us some great information, and we will certainly be getting back to you. This is